What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Outcast Haven deck profile. Today we have Nick Gabler, aka The Body. He is on to share his 18th place at Nationals Bravo deck with us. So first off, Nick, welcome, a fellow Minnesotan and a fellow Bravo player. We have a lot in common.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks for having me on, Blake. I'm excited to get into the Fab sphere and be able to talk a little bit about Bravo today.
Yeah, so that leads us to the most obvious first question. When you got ready for Nats, I know you're, obviously we play a lot. We know each other pretty well. And you're a Bravo main, but did you ever think of anything other than Bravo, or was it always Bravo? And if so, why?
Yeah, so I had always started playing Bravo because I had heard that in a relatively low variance game that is Flesh and Blood, Bravo is a relatively low variance hero. You have a lot of agency in a lot of your matchups, and that's what really drew me to him early on. And leading into the national season, I had thought a little bit about exploring Oldhim, but I really just didn't think I was going to have enough time to put together a cohesive list that I felt was going to be legitimately prepared to take or to face on a wide field. And so I just wanted to stick with my guns and go with Bravo, and just thought that that short amount of time we had to prepare kind of between Tails release and the tournament would be better spent on a hero I was more familiar with.
Yeah, it felt like it was either if you weren't a new player who was jumping in on like a Tails hero as the hero you were going for, then the only real option for a lot of people to jump to was Briar because it was relatively easy to pilot. It didn't require as many reps, but Oldhim required a lot of reps, so you basically had to be married to Oldhim as a hero versus Bravo, where you also need a lot of reps, but getting those reps, like, both of us have played Bravo for so long now that it's like, okay, well, I have reps into everything else.
Right.
I just need to get reps into the Tails heroes to make sure I'm comfortable. And realistically, right, like Lexi, you're like, cool, Ranger, whatever. But it was just Briar, Briar and Oldhim you kind of had to get. So only adding two things to test into was pretty good. So let's start with weapons. Obviously, Anathos, like Anathos, the OG, that hammer will never go anywhere. You're never going to take it out. I always have a hard time seeing any world where Bravo, Anathos, and Tectonic Plating aren't like this perfect synergy and marriage. But Titan's Fist, what did that come? I know we'll see the other half of that combo, but Titan's Fist.
Yeah, so I guess there's not really much we need to talk about when it comes to Anathos. It is just the tried and true, the bread and butter, and allows you to play an entire game plan based solely around the hammer. That could really pay you a lot of dividends back, especially in a really aggressive metagame where you want to be blocking out aggressively. But as we had found in our testing, when we were facing some of the newer Briar decks, Anathos was just not. We were just having so much trouble fatiguing those decks, especially as we went late into the game, and we ended up on the shield as a way to help us in that matchup, help us against the other Runeblade heroes. And as a result, you gotta bring the little fist too when you play the shield. So
yeah, Bravo's a big boy, but apparently Anathos is too big to swing with the shield. So
yeah, I mean he's carrying it around in one hand, but he's a diva, so he's gotta have the smaller hammer when he gets the shield too.
yeah, and that was definitely some tech that we tested a bunch, and then huge shout out to Kale and Jason. They got in a bunch of test games and helped us kind of confirm all of our suspicions about what the right lineup was. And this kind of, I think your list and my list and Jason's list were all a small variation of kind of like the list that between you, myself, Jason, and then Kale have all been working on for some. We relied on each other to really kind of get the base of the list and make little tweaks here and there. We talked a lot. We have a group chat with myself and Nick and Jason where, it's basically just Bravo talk all the time, trying to make sure we're ready. So Titan's Fist was definitely a point of discussion for quite a bit. And along with the shield, that led us to having room for the double null rune, which, why don't you talk about why that was so important in this metagame?
Yeah, so against the Briar decks, it is a deck that is somewhat vulnerable to fatigue. We know that there's some ways that the Briar deck can play around that fatigue, whether it be through Evergreen or stringing together Sting of Sorceries into multiple Ball Lightnings. But when you're able to weave around that and also stack your pitch with cards that can answer that, you can track their ball lightnings and their stings as they come back through their hand. So if they have multiple balls in hand, you can catch them with a powerful crush effect. When they have multiple no blocks, and you don't even have to worry about dominating it in those scenarios, and you can really disrupt that end game. And so as a result, we uh, we wanted to be playing that double null rune so that we could be getting full value from blocking out the Rosetta. And double null rune lets you specifically block Rosetta for 3 damage with 1 blue card without fatiguing your deck. So it
Mm-hmm.
also lets you play a lot slimmer on your overall deck size, and you can minimize the bad cards that you have to keep in your deck in the matchup, and you can just play that really lean 60 and still be really good at fatiguing decks. Even, I mean, I was fatiguing decks that were playing 72 cards, and I still had a large stack in deck. I did succumb to having too small of a deck when trying to fatigue my opponent in the last round, but overall, even playing a straight 60, it wasn't. I didn't have too much difficulty pushing them late into the game.
Yeah, I thought that was probably the most interesting thing was that with the shield, the Titan's Fist, and the Null Rune, you actually had this weird world where against Chain, when he was really popular, you had to run basically your full deck minus a couple cards like your equipment. But it was interesting because to your point against Briar, you're actually able to run a leaner deck, which means that the deck value that you have is so much better because you're not just kind of
Right.
shoving in cards like Remembrance. Like into Chain, you would
Right.
just throw Remembrance in because you're like, it's another card. I can bring 3 cards back. It just gives me more value because you actually needed your whole deck because they would run their whole deck. And in this version, Briar just kind of vomits all their cards onto the table. So you're like, yeah, they're gonna burn through their cards pretty quick. I just need to get things back. And I loved the pitch a blue, block the 2 null rune from Rosetta, slide the shield out, block 1 more, and basically trade 1 blue card in your deck for 3 of the 4 damage was just
Right.
so strong, so strong.
Right. No, and playing the 62 was really pivotal to help you get to your second cycle faster than the other deck.
Yep.
Especially if you were able to start the game on the play and you had a lot of agency in stacking that crippling or stacking that spinal,
Mm-hmm.
and you know when it's coming back through the deck. Just being able to get to your second cycle and those powerful turns first can be really helpful to help turn that game in your favor and take tempo back as you hit your second cycle.
Yeah. So let's talk about the attacks. I mean, this is Bravo, so we're gonna run. You got to run the big boys. You got to run Crippling Crush. You got to run Cranial Crush.
Right.
Yellow Disable basically acts as like your CNC,
Mm-hmm.
and does a lot of work there. And then I think the most interesting thing that we worked a lot on was we talked a lot about lead the charge things, answers for Prism,
Mm-hmm.
and what kind of came out as the solutions were most of the cards were kind of what you have to include. Lots of blues, a couple of yellows, but then basically ending up with Zealous Belting at 3 reds, 3 yellows, Rouse the Ancients because it's relatively easy to pull off when you start to pull out things like like losing some of the non-attacks that you just ran before, and then Spinal
Right.
Crush became really great answers for Prism that helped a ton in that matchup, but also added some value in other matchups, right?
Right. No, absolutely. And we knew going into the tournament that Prism was going to be a really hard deck to face, and we were expecting it to be a much greater share of the meta than it ended up being, especially in the day 2 field. I know we were expecting a lot of Briar, but I didn't quite know the dynamics of that matchup between Briar and Prism to know that Briar was just gonna smash the deck and basically remove it from the day 2 tables.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit unfortunate in that we had uh, I guess I'll overtext for that matchup a little bit in what I ended up facing at least. But I did have a little bit of splash damage, and that's what really I think led us to the Zealous Belting over some of these other answers because it's a card that you can bring in multiple matchups. Whereas Lead the Charge is really a solely Prism card, and I
Hmm.
really want to have all the cards in my deck be playing as many roles as possible. And Zealous Belting really does that, especially against Dash, letting you play more of an aggressive game and having access to another 3 copies. I mean, I think it was in round 6. I won a very close game against a Dash player, and I saw 5 Zealous Beltings, and it certainly contributed to my success in the matchup. So, overall, I think it was like the right decision to make coming into the weekend because everyone expected Prism to do a little bit
Hmm.
better too, and it,
Yeah.
it is probably the best answer in that matchup to help you fight against that aura stack and the shield stack.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is interesting too is Zealous kind of fits a great role of a like it's a really sneaky damage when
Mhm.
you happen upon it with like a pummel in your arsenal, because people will leave the Zealous alone because they're concerned about the follow-up crush effect that could be coming. And
Right.
a lot of times, like, I'd love to pummel Zealous belting because then they don't block, they're willing to take the 4 or 5 damage, and then all of a sudden they're taking 8 or 9 damage, losing a card, and then the next thing that comes in either has an effect or you just swing hammer for 6,
Mhm.
and now they're forced to block because otherwise they just took almost half their life in damage in one turn, and they get to this weird spot where they're like, oh, this turn really got out of hand on me. And it's like it's
Mhm.
a sneaky thing to pummel because they don't, I don't know, people just don't seem to expect pummel on Zealous belting for some reason,
No,
which
definitely not.
that I think they just forget it's a 2 cost. So
Right.
they're like, oh, hey, look at that. It was a 2 cost. I just lost a card. This is great. So,
Right.
you ran one of the things that a lot of discussion revolved around was the pummels. So you ended on 3 reds, no
Mhm.
blues, no yellows. I know right now there's like a really aggressive version of Bravo going around where people are
Yeah.
running like 9 pummels, and that's like
Yeah.
that's that's like
That
their
seems like a madman Bravo. I don't know
yeah.
if I could do that, but
That
I think yeah, there's a lot of options now moving into the metagame that might have been different, but overall I did land on just the 3 reds.
Yeah, it's. I think the 9 version is like other people's. It's their solution to Prism. They're like,
Right.
I'm just gonna kill Prism in 3 turns. Like I'm just not
Right.
gonna, which is I
I'm
mean,
gonna strip their hand turn after turn.
it's a solution. That's a solution that you can have. I think the issue with that version of the deck is it feels weaker into a lot of the rest of the field.
Yeah.
So you're like, well, I'm winning Prism. Like that feels like a friend response, like the classic friend tech where you have like one
Oh,
buddy you
absolutely.
play all the time who's just crushing you with Prism. You're like, I'm gonna show him. I'm playing 9 pummels. I'm gonna
Yeah.
take his
You
hand
just
every turn.
metagame the shit out of each other.
Yeah.
And you have these inbred messes that are just terrible into the field, but if you face your buddy in Swiss, you got his ass.
You're gonna crush him. He's gonna pay
Yeah.
for it. All right. So moving on to the defense reactions, which are, of course, a staple in Bravo. We have the
Mhm.
standard Fate for Scenes and Sink Belows, and then you're on 2 blue unmovables, and then 2 red staunches, and then 3 blue staunches. So that's
Mhm.
like those ratios. I think are a little different than what a lot of people are used to seeing. But what's your reasoning behind like the mix of staunch and unmovables?
Yeah, so in this metagame specifically, we knew Runeblade was going to be popular, and in general, especially when we're playing the Shield, I much prefer Staunch over Unmovable when
Mhm.
it comes to the blue pitch versions, especially. And so when I was looking to construct my deck, I knew that was going to be the defense reaction that I wanted more of if I was going to have to look to make cuts. And with how I built my deck, it's pretty lean. I don't have I was really looking to fatigue and play more of a mid-range game plan, and so I figured I could trim on blues pretty efficiently. Since I was going to be blocking a lot, all I really needed was 1 or 2 blues to keep in hand to swing back with my hammer at the end of each turn. And as a result, I ended up with I think 38 blues in the deck overall.
Mhm.
And the 2 unmovables were something that I could kind of side in and out, and sort of the flex slot that I ended on as just my utility blue that was a 3 pitch for Anathos and had some defensive utility as well. And the red staunch response was really something that I really liked into Runeblade for a while because of how it interacts with Plunder Run turns specifically,
Mhm.
being a card that straight up blocks for 7, and the ability, especially with Briar, I didn't. It was really nice to be able to block up to 10 in some turns,
Mhm.
with its alternate pitch cost. But that just really covers up Plunder Run turns nicely, and also has that leftover resource so that you can block an additional Rosetta arcane damage or any of the other superfluous arcane damage that they have coming throughout the turn.
Yeah, I think the one thing that the reason you got me convinced that Red Staunch is so good is that conversation about the covering up plunder run turns, because they run
Mm-hmm.
so many breakpoint cards. Like their
Right.
four is kind of their sweet spot for their attack power. So when they plunder run, now it's 7, but then even to your point, you can buff to 10, and that's kind of the number
Mm-hmm.
they always want to end on, is they'll red nimblism or something, and they end up giving it another 3 buff, and it
Right.
always ends up being 7 or 10. So, and even if they go 7 and you go no blocks, you can, or no blocks, then they move to reactions. If they kind of get jumpy and throw a razor or a lightning press to push it to 10, you're like, oh, cool. Now I'm going to go
Right.
10 with it. I won't go 7.
Well, and it happened multiple times too, where my opponents would be looking to razor a snatch at the beginning of their turn. They'd throw out the raw snatch. I'd declare no blocks. They throw down the razor, and you can cover that up at instant speed
Yep.
really nicely. And it was also pretty surprisingly good into exude confidence turns. Um, Righteous Cleansing was a card that I definitely would have, if I would have gone back, I would have put 3 in. Just realizing that exude confidence often will be coming in for 10 power with go again at the beginning of the turn. So
Mm-hmm.
having that Righteous Cleansing to block it up and turn your defense reactions back on, and then play that staunch response and cover up all that damage, really it took the wind out of this, like, a lot of my Briar opponent's sails when I was able to kind of bring that combination together.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that Bravo and Oldham, I mean, Bravo even more so than Oldham. Like, Oldham can do it because he has some big power cards, but he also has a lot of random, like,
Hmm.
mid power cards, like 7s and stuff. And when they do Exude for 10, like, I actually had a guy I was playing that I blocked it. With a Righteous Cleansing, I blocked his Exude for 10. So, and he lightning pressed it, and I, like, just kind of snaps, like, sync below it, and he was like,
Right.
"You can't do that." And I was like, yeah, I can. I'm blocking with the
Yeah.
10."
Yeah.
So
Right.
we're
No,
good.
it's
We're okay. We're fine. Don't worry about you.
it was just as a card to throw down and block with, much better than I would have expected. And moving forward, we'll have a lot of utility. I'll probably keep it at the 3, just because there's a lot of other decks that are playing Exude now too.
Yeah.
Lexi is a deck that can play Exude at the start of a combat chain with Go Again,
Hmm.
and has other pump effects too that could push it up into higher power. She plays the Lightning Press as well, so it just something that you can throw and block with, and has decent enough game or efficacy going into the late game.
Yeah.
And interacting with end games is pretty good.
Yeah. So we've got the best card to come out of Tails for Bravo, of course, in our non-attacks in the goat Terra
Oh,
Sunder.
absolutely.
Nothing.
There's an absolute house.
Nothing feels better as a Bravo player than being like, oh yeah, I'll pitch a blue Terra Sunder, pitch a blue Anathos for 7,
The,
dominating.
yeah,
If it hits,
right.
discard 2. So it basically becomes like a little baby Crippling Crush. So now you
Yeah,
get to run 6 Crippling Crush in your deck effectively.
yeah. 6 cripplings, but this one you only need 3 cards,
Yeah.
and it can just be any 2 blues with it. It is honestly, it is so good. It is one of the best cards in the deck, and what's so good about it too is that it's a blue, and you
Yep.
can set it up in the end game so easily,
Hmm.
especially once you've ripped away a lot of their equipment. It is definitely, it was the main reason to play Bravo coming out of Tales of Aria for
Yep.
sure. We weren't necessarily drawn to the shield right away, but we definitely had big eyes for Terra Thunder right when that card was spoiled.
Yeah, that was like the definite point of discussion amongst our little group of Bravo players. We're like, oh, Terra Sunder. That my first thought was, I need 3 foils and I need them now
Yeah,
because they got to
yeah.
go in foil. So one of the interesting things that I've found, and I'd be curious your thoughts, is Showtime is a card that I always wonder if it becomes one day or in the not too distant future with like potentially a card coming in the supplemental set. Do you think Showtime ever goes below 3 if they just give us a better blue 3 cost? Because I don't know about you, but I almost never play Showtime because Bravo has become very reliant, at least the more mid-rangey control Bravo, on pitch stacking. Like pitch stacking is a
Yeah.
huge part of the Bravo game, and
Mhm.
Showtime shuffling the deck actually presents an issue a lot of times where if you don't
Mhm.
see it turn 1 or 2, you just don't ever want to play it. But it's a 3 block blue pitch. So
Right.
it fills such an important role in what Bravo is trying to do that you obviously don't take it out of the deck. But it kind of makes me think of Arc Knight Ascendancy, how that's kind of fallen out of favor with Viserai players because they're not playing to get 6 or 7 or 8 rune chance. A lot of times they're just trying to get 1 or 2 and play this
Mhm.
very like spray damage. So like Arc Knight Ascendancy has basically become binder fodder for most Viserai players.
Right.
Do you see a world where that happens with Showtime, or how often do you play Showtime actually?
Yeah, so I think this is actually something I've been thinking about a lot, and is a really interesting discussion point. And I like that you bring up Arc Knight Ascendancy too, because it kind of sits in the similar vein where both cards play towards higher highs, right? They let you
Yep.
set up these big powerful turns that do a lot of damage and are very swinging effects. But we've seen, because Flesh and Blood's a low variance game, oftentimes people have kind of gone to the middle road, the most consistent, sort of lowest
Hmm.
floor plan rather than the highest ceiling plan, or the highest floor rather than
Yep.
highest ceiling plan. Um, and I think with Showtime, I, I will probably continue to run 3 for the near future, just for the sheer turn one power that it provides.
Yep.
It does so much for you if you play it on the first turn of the game, and it that alone increases your win percentage in that game quite a bit, I would imagine. I mean,
Hmm.
just being able to set up a powerful pivot turn, giving you an extra card, and in the mid game, while the shuffle can be a detriment, if your pitch gets messed up throughout the game, and that definitely happens, where you have maybe multiple pummels stuck together, or you have
Hmm.
multiple reds stuck together, that is going to come back and disrupt you later in the game. It might be worth it to shuffle then at that point and just take the extra card that's going to be coming off the Showtime to swing your hammer with, just to kind of start from fresh as far as setting up your second cycle goes. But I've seen some people trimming it, and I wouldn't fault you if you did. I think there's a
Yeah.
legitimate case too, because it does, especially as we move forward and we're getting. I mean, I never thought Stamp Authority was going to come out of the deck,
Hmm.
and here we are.
Yeah.
We pulled it pretty quickly in our testing process.
Yeah, it kind of became a card like these non-attack actions too kind of have to
Hmm.
fill a really vital role in the deck because as Bravo you really want to be the aggressor a lot of times until you shift to the control, but
Hmm.
when you're playing control you don't care if it's a non-attack or an attack, and the only decks that it really matters into are like Bolton. It becomes
Right.
problematic if you don't have enough non-attacks, but that's actually a matchup where I thought it was interesting because like Red Zealous became a really strong card in that matchup
Hmm.
because what you often want to do is like go blow for blow with Bolton until you get low on, like when you get to that middle life road you need to just be pushing harder because
Right.
once they have to forfeit hand, what they can do is significantly less powerful than you a lot of times. Like they need more cards in their hand to do things, whereas you can just go hammer for 6 over and over and over and continue to block efficiently.
Hmm.
So it's like Showtime was a card that fit a role like Stamp Authority of helping you block that matchup better. But now you're just like, maybe I just don't care about that. And it would be interesting to me if Showtime became one of those cards that people started toying with at like 2 of. If you see it
Yeah.
early, great. If you don't, that's fine because it's kind of like Towering Titan. Turn one,
Right.
it's just crazy. After that, you're never going to play it. There's like no world where you're really going to play it unless, to your point, Showtime offers a little bit more value in than like Towering Titan because
Hmm.
it does. I have played Showtime sometimes literally just to shuffle because I
Right.
realize
You know your pitch is
yeah,
destroyed.
you drew into like a Crippling Crush and a Spinal Crush in the same hand, but you had to pitch them both away too close to each other, and you're like, no, no, no,
Right.
we gotta
Right.
shuffle,
Right.
we gotta shuffle. It also presents like a really interesting thing. One of my favorite uses of Showtime is into Prism. Being able to Mage Master
Hmm.
boots it and go get one of your Righteous Cleansing or Disables that lets you pop Library, and
Right.
that offers a ton of value too. So there's it has way more value than like Towering Titan did, but it is an
Right.
interesting discussion about if it holds a place long term in the deck.
All right, and especially as we have played with Rouse the Ancients more, and that it might even be better for the deck than Terra Sunder was as an
Mm-hmm.
addition, because Rouse really lets you do so many things that the deck just couldn't do before. And that's one of the main considerations why we moved away from some of these other non-attack actions, is because
Mm-hmm.
we really wanted to enable those Rouse turns to fire when we needed them to, because that 7 with Go Again is just so powerful coming out of the deck. And especially when you have Tome of Fyendal, where you can follow that up with a powerful crush effect, and you have surges floating around, it's not out of the realm of possibility to play Arouse the Ancients into a crippling crush, into a spinal crush, and pivot the game right from there. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
presenting 20 damage in one turn as well as a really relevant on hit is pretty good.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I really just, it is so good. I love Rouse, and it was surprisingly good against Briar too,
yeah,
just as a blue pitch that you could put away for later and actually let you end the game before the clock went out.
yeah. It serves a ton of purposes. Like Rouse is one of those cards, and Yeah, I love that card. So with the instance at the end of the deck here, we run into the classic, 4 that Bravo always runs:
Hmm.
red sigil, yellow remember, only one remembrance, but remembrance, and
Right.
those are just good cards. I will say I found that one of the interesting things about sigil was it was such a against a Briar deck, it became a really high ceiling and
Hmm.
really low floor card because I one of the games that I won against a Briar, I almost lost because on the turn that I needed to cover up one last attack, instead of holding a 3 block card with a piece of armor, I was holding a sigil. So
Hmm.
I took the damage from the card plus a ball lightning and an electrify trigger, and I thought, man, this 3 life just cost me
Right.
7, and had it just been a 3 block card, I would have been able to cover up the damage. And it was a weird card in that matchup, but in every other matchup, sigil is just so strong because it's the world's greatest. I found that most Briars were running CNC, and there's
Hmm.
nothing better than baiting a CNC
Hmm.
with a sigil and arsenal.
Oh, absolutely. You will definitely watch your opponent deflate when you're able to bait out their CNC when they take an off turn, thinking they're going to disrupt you, and you throw one card, gain 3 life, and move on with your day.
It's
Like
yeah.
it's really powerful. But I know exactly what you mean with some of those awkward turns playing into Briar when it came to not being able to block, and I think that's a pretty interesting way that LSS is kind of maybe attacking life game and gain in the format.
Hmm.
Life gain can definitely be something really powerful, and it's not something that a lot of the heroes can really add into their game plan and enact it efficiently. And
Hmm.
having some of these damage amplification effects, like Electrify, where that 1 damage coming through really equates to 4 damage coming through,
Hmm.
puts some risk at having life game in your deck. And I'm afraid there might be a little more of it coming in the future, but well, let's hope not.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's such an interesting thing because one of the things that Bravo does better than everybody else is he forces people to put on more damage than any other deck in the game,
Mhm.
realistically. Because with I more often than not, Bravo in a long game will resolve all 3 sigils and a tome from Arsenal,
Mhm.
probably for 5. And if you do that, like people don't think about the fact that Bravo is basically playing a 54 life game, and then
Right.
on top of his 54 life game, he's playing with 3 on Skullcap, 3 on Crater Fist, 3 on Tectonic Plating. So Bravo basically plays like a 63 life game where other
Mhm.
heroes are trying to play 40 plus what little armor they have. Some heroes having 0 armor or like 2 armor block that goes away. Like Katsu gets like 4 armor
Yeah.
block, but all of it breaks
Right.
except for the gloves. So you think about the difference in that game plan. It's just absolutely absurd because of what Bravo's allowed to do. And Sigil is such an important role that you're like,
Mhm.
even with the detriment that it can create with some of those like damage amplification, it's just too good at what it does. It's so important to what Bravo's trying to accomplish.
Right. And it's kind of one of the ways that you can defensively punish your opponent's off turns, because
Hmm.
there's often a lot of times where you have a lot of blues in hand and there's not much you can do. And being able to block with some cards to block out their off turn and then still gain 3 life and swing with your hammer
Hmm.
on your own turn is a lot of value. Going up life while trading in some form of damage or presenting some damage is really strong when you're trying to fatigue your opponent and play a mid game strategy. And Sigil just helps kind of smooth out a lot of your hands and just keep you healthy, especially as a deck that needs to take some damage to swing damage back.
Hmm.
They you need a lot of your hand to present really big threats, and so Sigil helps keep you topped off to do that.
So with Nats over, do you look at this deck and think there's anything that you would change, like off the top of your head, or after your Nats experience, do you think there's anything that you would change, or are you pretty happy with like the deck's current iteration?
I think we're pretty close to what I would still be playing. Like I'd mentioned before, I would trim on some of the zealous beltings. I don't know if I'd land on the red or the yellow, which one would be better. They each kind of have their scenarios that they're strong in. Um, but I'm not exactly sure what I would use those slots to target. Oldhim is definitely going to be a stronger part of the meta moving forward than he was previously in the
Hmm.
Nats season, and I'm not exactly sure what the best way is for Bravo to tackle him, especially because there's so many ways for Oldhim to play, and the Oldhim list that won the calling was pretty cool. So I might be experimenting with the old man for a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Bravo is one of those decks that he's old faithful. You can
Oh, absolutely.
you might go play some Oldhim, but at the end of the day, like what Bravo does is so consistent. His field matchup and
Right.
is so good. Plus, you know what? I've never lost to time with Bravo. People always complain about control decks going to time, but Bravo has solutions for time. If you look up the
Right.
clock and you think it's time, you're like, yeah, I could take some damage to dominate a crippling crush here and just go ahead and get myself ahead and destroy him.
Right. Well, and to be honest, most of the time I've gone to time, it's not because I'm the one that's taken a lot of time
Yeah.
making my decisions. So
It's true.
if people have an issue with going to time against Bravo, well, maybe they need to play faster against
Yeah. You
him.
can't think 10 turns. So,
Right,
well,
right.
Nick, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing your deck with us. And
Mhm.
congrats again on your 18th place finish. That was
Yeah, thank you.
huge field. Just, grinding through. It's always tough to grind through when you're playing a control deck in those big, long tournaments. It can be mentally taxing, but you
Mhm.
press through. So, do you want to give any shout outs?
Yeah, no, I definitely want to shout out. I had a lot of opponents in the tournament that really just showed a lot of honestly stellar sportsmanship. There were multiple times throughout the event where I essentially had my opponent fatigued. We were very nearing time. I was swinging with my hammer, and instead of blocking, they were kind of admitted defeat and took the damage. And just because had we had maybe 45 seconds more, the game would have legitimately ended.
Yeah.
And it's kind of stuff like that. And there was overall just throughout the tournament a lot of really awesome people, and it made me really happy to be a part of this card game community where even though there's been some negative news recently, there is just so much good that's come out of it. There's so many people that are really invested, and we have a really special community here.
Yeah. Yeah, Flesh and Blood is such a good community. So, and the last thing, we'll make sure we get a link in the description. But I know you got a Patreon, so we got to give you a chance to go ahead and advertise it. So plug it real quick.
Yeah, yeah, no. So I write some articles about Flesh and Blood. I post them over on my Patreon at The Body Brigade. I just do kind of. It's not anything too crazy. I like to post at least one article a week, usually on Tuesday or Thursday, as I'm able to finish them up. And then that can range from anything from limited review to deck guides, or to just my stories and experiences playing Flesh and Blood, and anything I really feel like I might share with y'all. So you can head on over there and see what I have to offer.
Yeah. So we'll get a link to that in the description. So thank you
Mhm.
guys for coming, checking out another deck profile here. Thanks to Nick for hanging out with us and sharing his deck. So if you're a Bravo player and you have thoughts or insight, we're always interested to see what other Bravo players are doing. Otherwise, we will see you next time, guys. Thanks so much.
And see you later.